invoices, how to issue an invoice for within international trade business, and also we're going to look at the payment systems later on. Going to start with invoice. Now, this invoice is the most important document an exporter would produce, and it is important to pay proper attention to it. Well, not only is the most important document you're going to issue, every other document would be drawn upon that. And the invoice actually is the contract. It's giving the specification of the goods, the payment methods, the delivery methods, the Incoterms that you're going to put on it between the buyer and seller. So everything is within that invoice, and you have to pay proper attention to it in its preparation and in content. Now let's go to the next slide. Now there are different types of invoice, but in reality they're all the same. We start a commercial invoice. A commercial invoice, it's the contract, is the evidence for a seller, between the seller and buyer, which they have agreed to exchange some goods for the price in a certain conditions, being the conditions of goods, the way it's delivered, and who is responsible for different elements of the logistic of it. So all that's going to go into a commercial invoice. Well, when you are doing international trade, the client asks for a price of the good, and what you issue at the beginning is what we call a pro forma invoice, which in reality is a quotation. You are quoting to a potential buyer what the goods would cost, what are his specification, what's his packaging, and in what form you are delivering it to it. So it can have a FOB price, that means on board, or ex-factory, usually the starting point that the seller would say, at my warehouse, these are the goods at these prices. Now, pro forma invoice is a quotation which would allow, obviously, the buyer, the investor, to get on with his other preparation, which we're going to look at a bit later on. Now, which is exactly the same as commercial invoice. Once you agree to all the elements of your contract with the buyer, if you are buying with the exporter, the manufacturer, then it will be converted to commercial invoice. Now then you can have a commercial invoice with a declaration. Now with regard to certain goods and certain countries, they want you to make an announcement, make a declaration saying what's the origin of these goods, where are they produced, maybe some substances not used in it. So that's a declaration. It's a requirement by the importing country. Then you got the certified invoices. A certified invoice is same commercial invoice which goes to, let's say, your usually Chamber of Commerce, local Chamber of Commerce, which they would authenticate the company who's issuing the invoice, the signatory of the invoice, so there is an authorized person to do it. It is a way of making sure that the invoice is produced by a bona fide company and an authorized person has signed it. Now, next type is, after certified invoice, you got the legalized invoice. Now, after certification, invoice can be presented to the embassy of the country of the destination to be legalized. What the embassy would do actually is it will confirm that whoever certified the invoice is a right body, like, it is really Chamber of Commerce of this city has done it. So it's a secondary verification. And then you have got finally consular invoice. The consular invoice is usually used by South American countries, which they have got their own standard forms usually, which you transfer the information from your invoice into that, and then you give all the documentation, and that consul or the embassy would carry on further investigation, and then they will stamp it and say it is all right and correct. That's a consular invoice. Let's look at we go back to the pro forma invoice, which is usually the first piece of document you will produce for a buyer. Or if you are a buyer, that's what you are asking. You ask a seller to give me a pro forma invoice for these goods, ex-factory, FOB, CNF, SIF, whatever the circumstance may be. So, and why do you need to do that? Because the importer needs to go probably to take it to his bank to arrange the LC, or if in certain countries which they need to get an allocation for foreign currency, or they might be reselling the product, or they are buying on behalf of a client so they can go and negotiate with the client. Usually the pro forma invoices have got the validity period. That means you say, this is the price I will supply these goods in these conditions to you, and this price is valid for next 30 days or 60 days. So you're going to give time for the importer to go and carry on his down the line activities and secure the sales or foreign currency and so on. So that's a pro forma invoice. Once it's agreed, the same, all of that would be moved to your commercial invoice. Now, what are the things going to be on the invoice itself? Obviously, the name of buyer and the name of a seller, this name, which is a consignor and consignee. So that is the most important thing that has to be there. Make sure all contact details are there. The address, the phone numbers, mobile numbers, fax numbers, email addresses, because if the goods are, when the goods are moving between the ports and the ships and the trucks and whatever, if anything goes wrong, they can contact somebody, because you need to act fast. Any delay costs money. Your goods might be damaged, so you want to know as quickly as possible for the forwarders and shippers to get in touch with you. You want to make sure they got all the possible contact details to do that. You need to have a full descriptions of the good. And I mean full description. You don't say machinery parts. What kind of machinery part? What machine you talking about? Now, if less you put, the more chance of delays in customs, either leaving the country or getting into the next country and so on. So full description of the goods has to be there, its dimensions, packaging and so on. The total number of them, the weight of them and so on. If you got the tariff numbers for it, especially from both sides, if there's a tariff number for the country is leaving, you put it there so the customs can release it as quick as possible. And if you know the tariff code or custom code for from the country of destination, you make sure you put it there so it's quicker to go through the custom procedures. Obviously, the total value of the goods have to be there. It doesn't matter if you're sending a sample. It doesn't matter if you say there is no resale value. It has to have a value. So you say it's not for resale, but its value would be something like that. Don't say it's not worth it anything. The country of origin, the certification of it is needed. The signature of exporter, who is the exporter, has to sign it there, so it can be identified. And the reason for export. Yeah. So if you are selling certain cotton or fabric or to another country, you say is for purpose of making garments, or is for medical purposes, making medical dressing or wound dressing, or if you are, because there are many products which can be used for different purposes, and you are not, you cannot know what are the regulation with different sort of use of that product. So you would say, I am selling this chemical for production of fertilizers. So if the country which is receiving it end up using it for something else, you are not aware of it. And if it's illegal, you would not hopefully be part of that illegal activity. There are other information subject to the countries you are working, like, for VAT registration, if you're working within Europe. In many countries, as an exporter, needs to have an export license or export license numbers to go on it. So there are additional information which is subject to country of destination or country you're living. You have to put those information on the invoice. You have to check with the local regulation and destination regulation. Now, finally, I think I'm going to be talking with regard to your packaging. It is important to not only say what are your goods and this specification of the goods. You have to say how is it packed, how many pieces in each box, how many boxes in the consignment or in this cargo or in this container. You need to not only give the weight of it, each piece, and the total weight, so it comes out, also the volume, the dimension of the packaging. And obviously the accurate descriptions of the goods is important. Is it any dangerous material in it, which affects the shipping and insurances. Now, I think that's enough of invoices. There are more on your notes on your course. You can go and see them or read them. And as I said, you have to also look at what are the local regulations with regard to other data you have to put on the invoice. See you later.